Okay, so you've already talked about some of the successes you've experienced. What else have you achieved this semester that you feel the most proud of implementing blended learning?
I would say that as a PLC and also individually as teachers, we're more data savvy than we've ever been. And it's interesting because there's data everywhere. And I think what we've gotten really good at is what data is important, what data is valuable to the student. And that requires a little bit of digging because we've got tons of data and not all of it is useful. Some of it is very useful, but some of it is just like, well, we cover that maybe once in the 4th 6 weeks and then we never talk about it again. So it's the stuff that we're covering all year that we now know is like, that's the important stuff. That's the stuff that's very valuable, and we're getting very good at using it and using it as a tool to reteach and using it in conferences with the students. I think data is, being data savvy is one of our biggest successes this year.
I'm gonna agree with the using data and also with the student ownership piece being very successful, because knock on wood, I don't have an angry parent phone call yet over anything, nor do I have an angry kid over anything. But one thing that we've used with the data savvy and deciding what's important is when we do their short answer responses, we've broken it down and where we check off boxes. And so the kids, when they get it back, they can see, I know how to do this part of the assignment, I don't know how to do this part. And so when they come to us and we have our one-on-one conferences or they come to tutorials, we can literally with them next to us, and then they can analyze their own data right here and say, well, I know how to answer the question, but I'm really struggling with coming up with a quote that matches. Or if they have that whole part down and they don't have the explanation, they know exactly which part of the whole process they are struggling in. And the same with the essay writing. I mean, they can tell me, this is the part that I'm not doing when they look at the rubric. And so, from the Texas Tech course also, we've learned that we are inundated with data, and that one thing sometimes teachers don't get credit for is that sometimes the most valuable data is the data that we have in our classroom that we have created for our kids. Because we know our kids, we know them the best, we know the curriculum, we know the TEKS, we know exactly everything that they need to be achieving. And so, and also just personal observation, personal conferencing, intuition about a child is just as valuable as what's on paper at times when it comes to their learning and their achievement. But it was very validating from that course to know that the data we're collecting is some of the most valuable data that you can use on the child versus just giving them a test. Say, here you go, and now let's look at it.
Yeah, because if they're given an assessment or a screener online, they may just be having a bad day. Something may have gone wrong at home. They're not taking the test seriously. They're not giving us their best effort. So if we rely just on that and not consider other different forms of information, then we're not getting a full picture of the student.
I'm really excited to see their middle of the year reading screener, because they took the beginning of the year one, what week of it was of school?
Second or third week.
Second or third, before Blended had really been instilled in their minds, or the student ownership piece was really instilled in their minds. And I had so many kids say, well, I didn't really try. I didn't really try. Like, I had like 3 kids that were not even reading they weren't even able to be assessed on like the grade level because it was so low. And of course, it's my 3 biggest behavior problems. And I'm like, oh, that's ironic, and of course, when we have a conference and I show them this, and I'm like, this is what it says, their first reaction is, but I didn't try. You can't look at that, I didn't try. And I'm like, okay, so what do you know now? Like, I'm using this in my classroom to help you. So what do you have to do? You have to show me what you can do, or else I cannot help you. And so that was very
It might be beneficial for us to review those with each of the kids before the next screener.
Yeah, I think so too. I definitely plan on it.
For sure.
With my kids, I'm starting to branch off slowly into more personalized, like having kids at different levels. I use the CBA the second 6 weeks to give them a diagnostics test for no writing over the grammar issues that I saw, and so I had, I think it's 14 students that showed they mastered that unit or they're proficient. So I decided with Coach Grant that instead of giving them the same practice that the other students who are not, who cut, 32 on that diagnostics test, I went back and looked at them specifically and saw what, because they were all struggled with the same kind of standard on that CBA. And so I went and gave them harder things like passive voice and active voice and stuff, and gave them a second diagnostics test. And based off of that, I gave them separate practice because I gave them a harder unit, their scores were more like the other ones. So, and like today, letting them know, hey, you're gonna have a separate thing. It's gonna say 2 on there, and that's your practice. You may see the other practice, you don't have to worry about it, but I'm still gonna expect you to do the same amount of units that they are. And they were like, what are you talking about? So then I pulled up the screen that I see on No Red Ink and showed them, this is the first test, here you are, all mastered it. You're all proficient. I'm not wasting your time doing this practice that you already know. And so then they were just like, oh yeah, okay, awesome. And then when I said I gave you harder ones, they're like, yeah, that was harder. So I was like, because you don't know it, so now you can go back and do it. So it's just, hopefully at one point, we'll have more, separate. I don't know necessarily how I'm gonna do the grades in the grade book, but it's a work in progress.
I think one of the things that I've tried to add more personalization to is the way that the students respond to an OER, a short answer response. In the past, what I've taken them through is answer, prove, explain, just the basic that they're all used to. But now the third part, the explanation part that's been kind of ambiguous and hard for them to get a handle on, I've branched that into 3 choices based on the type of question they have or what they feel comfortable answering. And so they've got 3 different ways that they can approach the explanation part, and I've started to see, I'm thinking by the end of the year it's gonna be great, but right now I'm starting to see that they're getting it, that they can explain in a way that's not just repeating the answer that they've given, and I'm seeing variety on the same question from different students based on how they're approaching their thinking. So that's encouraging to me so far.
I think the way we've worked together as a PLC this year has been a success. There's a lot you have to overcome when you're doing something like this. And everybody has to be held accountable, and everybody has been accountable. And everybody's pulled their weight. And you cannot do this if your team is not strong. You've got to have good chemistry, and you've got to be able to do what needs to be done. And you can't look at things and say, well, how am I going to do that? You have to look at things and say, all right, we can do that. Let's make it happen. And you have to experiment, and you have to have the ability within you to say, I'm going to try something new today. All right, that didn't work. I'm going to try something new tomorrow. And we do that already as teachers, but this is a much bigger scale and a much bigger scope. And you have to be okay with a little bit of chaos, and you have to be okay with a little bit of unorganization, believing in your team and knowing that eventually everything's going to be organized. We're all going to figure this out, and we're going to make good change and good things happen.
I think it's that we trust each other. We trust to be able to bounce ideas, and that we'll tell each other, I don't think that's a good idea. Like, that's either too ambitious or that's really lower. Like, it's not helpful. And we're able to trust each other with that kind of feedback and not, just take it personally, because we all have our best interests, our kids' best interests in our minds, and we're just trying to make sure they're successful. And so I don't think any of us take it personally when we turn down